Vanacha Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. I think they have connected Jyom Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paramahansa Sadasi Srimad. इस दिवाइन जैसे इसे भक्ति विधान स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। इसकॉन संस्थापकाचार्य श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय विष्णुपाद पद्मांस परमहंस अष्टोत्तर सदाशिव श्रीमद् भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। नामाचार्य श्री अधर्ष ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत दादा श्री सादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोकुल गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरिवर्धन की जय। श्री श्री गौरांगी बेंगलोरीश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। गंगामई की जय। मनमई की जय। भक्ति देव की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। श्री हरनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन भक्त की जय। समावेश भक्तवंद की जय। गौर प्रेमानंद की Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the Assembly Lord. All glories to the Assembly Lord. All glories to the Assembly Lord. All glories to the Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtaprayeshu Bhatreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhagavati Naishti. Hare Krishna, so welcome you all to the Saturday morning Srimad Bhagavatam summary study. Today we are discussing from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, chapter 21, text number 1 to text number 28. We'll see how much of time we get. Subject is conversation between Manu and Kardama. So in the previous chapters up to chapter 19, there was a discussion on appearance of Lord Bharavadev and killing of Hiranyaksha. This was followed by various types of creation by Lord Brahma in chapter 20. And then with the conclusion, the chapter 21 begins with conversation between Manu and Kardama on how, where Vidura and Maitreya are discussing as to how the progeny was created by Swayambhuva Manu. How was the dynasty of Swayambhuva Manu and how he created progeny? So we'll start with text number 1. Translation. We may not have time to read the slokas, and important slokas we can try and read. Text number 1. Vidura said, the line of Swayambhuva Manu was most esteemed. O worshipful sage, I beg you give me an account of this race, whose progeny multiplied through sexual intercourse. So some of the important points here in this particular verse is, now Vidura is asking Maitreya Rishi about Swayambhuva Manu. Now here is specifically mentioned about how the dynasty of Swayambhuva Manu developed, particularly because he multiplied the progeny by means of sexual intercourse. So Vidura is not interested in a common man's progeny where they create progeny by sexual intercourse. But here he is very much interested in Swayambhuva Manu's progeny because Swayambhuva Manu was a very great devotee of the Lord. He was a great king also. His activities were very, very glorious. And as per Shastras, sexual intercourse is permitted for procreation, not for recreation. So those who utilize this for creating a progeny by which the dynasty expands and all become devotees of the Lord, this particular activity is permitted. So Vidura is specifically interested in hearing about the persons who are great examples to the society. And by hearing the examples of activities of such great personalities, one becomes very much enlightened. So these are the important points from. And Swayambhuva Manu was one such great example. So text number 2. Then Vidura is further asking Maitreya. The two great sons of Swayambhuva Manu, Priyavrata and Uttanapada, ruled the world consisting of 7 islands just according to religious principles. So both Manu was also a great devotee of the Lord, and his 2 sons Priyavrata and Uttanapada, they also ruled the world according to religious principles. The religious principles are established by the Lord, which is mentioned in the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where it says, Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam. And great devotees of the Lord, who are Raja Rishis, who are kings as well as devotees, they rule the kingdom also based on these religious principles. Now, there is no chronological history of other great Indian kings, but Srimad Bhagavatam mentions about Priyavrata and Uttanapada, and also some great kings like Lord Ramachandra, Maharaja Yudhishthira, etc. Because it is worth hearing, and common man might get benefited by hearing their histories. Also, Srimad Bhagavatam is all about Krishna Katha. Krishna Katha about Bhagavan as well as Bhagavata. That means about the Lord himself and also devotees of the Lord. And hearing becomes complete by hearing about the activities of such great devotees of the Lord. Text number 3. Vidura further says, O holy Brahmana, O sinless one, you have spoken of his daughter known by the name Devahuti as the wife of sage Kardama, the Lord of created beings. Here they are mentioned about two types of Manus, Swayambhuva Manu and Chakshusha Manu. So Manus are the origin of mankind, and all the entire ruling, we are all coming from Manu, we are all origins from Manu himself. And then there are 14 such Manus, and each Manu has a cycle of about 71 Dibya Yugas. It's a very long life cycle. It's difficult to pronounce these in terms of numbers, but then this is how each Manu works. And in each of these Manu, there are different Brahmas also who come up and take up the progeny. Text number 4. Vidura further asks, how many offspring did that great yogi beget to the princess who was endowed with eightfold perfection in the yoga principles? Oh, pray, tell me this, for I am eager to hear. So Vidura is asking about the characteristics of a great yogi like Karda Muni, who was endowed with eightfold perfection in the yoga system. So yoga system which normally they practice these days is an artificial imitation of what the original system of yoga existed in other ages, which is not practically applicable these days. Yoga system basically means, as per Patanjali yoga system, also meditating on the form of the Lord situated within the heart. But the current day yoga system basically focuses on more of a physical exercise than anything else. So some of the steps that are given for the yogas are given here: control of the senses, strict following of the rules and regulations, practice of different sitting postures, control of the breath, withdrawing the sense from sense objects, concentration of the mind, meditation, and self-realization. The ultimate goal is to achieve self-realization, which is practically not possible in the current age of Kali, because to practice this type of yoga, which was prevalent in Satya Yuga, one has to go to a very lonely place like a forest or a mountain, be there without food or water for days or months and practice this yoga system. And there should not be any external disturbance like a sound. So even before the class started, Mataji said that some sound is coming. So under these type of circumstances, yoga is practically not possible. And when one practices this type of yoga system perfectly, then one can achieve the eightfold mystic perfections like Anima, Lagima, Mahima. It is becoming lighter than the lightest, heavier than the heaviest. One can move at a speed more than the speed of wind. So these are eightfold mystic perfections that one can achieve. But again, these are material opulences. This is not the goal of yoga. Ultimate goal of yoga is to see the Lord. Just possible in Satya Yuga. It is practically not possible in this Kali Yuga. We go to text number 5. Vidura further inquires, O holy sage, tell me how the worshipful Ruchi and Daksha, the son of Brahma, generated children after securing as their wives the other two daughters of Swayambhuva Manu. So Swayambhuva Manu had two daughters, Ruchi and Daksha, and they both married. Swayambhuva Manu had three daughters, Devahuti, Akuti, and Prasuti. So Kardamuni married Devahuti, Akuti married
Prajapati.
Prajapati, Ruchi, and Daksha married Prasuti. And these couples and their children further produced a lot of children to populate the entire universe. So that is how the dynasty went on. Now, in response to this, in text number 6, Maitri Rishi says, he says, commanded by Lord Brahma to beget children in the world, the worshipful Kardam Muni practiced penance on the bank of the river Saraswati for a period of 10,000 years. So Kardam Muni actually performed tapasya for a period of 10,000 years on the bank of Saraswati river. So in the earlier years also, and even during the current age, before one gets married, or one gets into a union with the opposite sex, one is supposed to perform tapasya. In the earlier years, they used to go to the bank of a river or some holy places to perform, and they used to perform tapasya for 10,000 years and so forth. Many examples are there in Srimad Bhagavatam. This is because material birth means material conditioning, which is material resulting into material contamination. So great devotees of the Lord, they used to go outside and perform tapasya for many years together. And once they become purified, or they feel that they have become purified of the material contamination, then they have union with the opposite sex. Some of the examples given in Srimad Bhagavatam are King Prachina Barhisa. He sent all his sons to perform tapasya for 10,000 years, and they were known as the Parchetas. And they went under the waters of the ocean. And then after performing tapasya, they came out and then they married. Similarly, Daksha had different sons called Haryashvas and Savalasvas, and they performed tapasya before getting married. In this particular sloka also, there is a mention of how Maharishi, Valmiki Rishi, he performed tapasya for 10,000 years. But the current yoga system of practicing tapasya for 15 minutes by trying to control the breathing is merely a show bottle yoga, because the ultimate point is to control our senses and see that our senses are used in the service of the Lord. If not, the yoga practice is a waste of time and energy. So that's why the Prabhupada mentioned that it's more of a cheating system of a yoga, which is not useful. Text number 7. Then Maitri Rishi goes on further replying. During that period of penance, the sage Kardama, by worship through devotional service in trance, propitiated the personality of Godhead, who is the quick bestower of all blessings upon those who flee to him for protection. Very important sloka. So here it says that Kardamuni actually performed tapasya through devotional service. So even if one performs tapasya or undertakes austerities without devotional service, it is merely a waste of time and energy, because the goal will not be achieved. One may get some physical perfections, but that is not the end of all these austerities. So Kardamuni, he performed devotional service, and thereby he performed this yoga. And on whom he meditated on the personality of Godhead, who is the quick bestower of all the blessings upon those who flee to him for protection. That means those who seek protection from the Supreme Lord, the Lord, when he becomes pleased by his disciple or devotee performing tapasya to please the Lord immediately bestows all the blessings to such a great devotee. Some important points in this particular verse are devotional service is a must, irrespective of whatever yoga one practices. There are many different types of yoga. For example, Jnana Yoga, where people speculate or try to speculate on knowledge. Even that requires a little bit of devotional service, because ultimately one has to know what should be knowledge focused on. Another type is Karma Yoga. If one does not know what is the purpose of performing karma, to whom the results are to be offered, one can get entangled into this material world. So even for that, to perform karma yoga, one has to know who the result is to be offered, for which one must know what is devotional service. And even dhyana yoga, if dhyana yoga is not performed with an understanding that one must meditate on the Supreme Lord, it is not a yoga practice. So devotional service is a must for practicing all types of yoga. And Kardan Muni performed exactly what he knew on the Supreme Lord himself, by which the Lord was pleased with him. The Lord himself states to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita 6:47, of all the yogis, the one who with great faith abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me, he is the most intimately united with me in yoga, and he is the highest of all. This is my opinion. So the Lord is concluding by this in this last verse in Bhagavad Gita chapter 6, stating that the topmost yogi is the one who actually thinks of the Lord always, and then which should result in rendering transcendental loving service. So we, in this particular age of Kali, which we resort to the process of hearing and chanting, we are taking this process also ultimately to be engaged in serving the Lord. So this is the process by which one can constantly be engaged in devotional service, and we can be always linked. Yoga means a linking process. So Kardamuni performed this dhyana yoga with devotional service. So devotional service is a must. There is also a mention about how the so-called yogis of today practice. This is a quote from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 16, text 17, which says, self-complacent and always impudent, deluded by wealth and false prestige, they sometimes proudly perform sacrifices in name only, without following any rules and regulations. So so-called yogis who try to perform yoga without properly understanding the rules and regulations and understanding what is the ultimate goal of the sacrifice, they are simply wasting their wealth and trying to show their wealth and false prestige. We go to text number 8. Then in the Satyuga translation, then in the Satyuga, the lotus-eyed Supreme Personality of Godhead, being pleased, showed himself to that Kardamuni and displayed his transcendental form, which can be understood only through the Vedas. So this particular pastime happened in Satyuga, as I mentioned, and the Lord was very much pleased with the type of austerities that Kardamuni performed. And being pleased with Kardamuni, the Lord displayed his transcendental form, and which this form also can be understood through the knowledge of the Vedas only. So there are 2 points that are very much important that are mentioned here. One is that the Lord becomes pleased with the austerities of the devotees, and by which the Lord reveals his transcendental form to Kardamuni or anybody, any devotee. The Lord does not have a material form like us, but his form is transcendental, which is described. The second important point is that which is described in the scriptures, Vedas, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, where it is mentioned the Lord's form is composed of Satchit Ananda, that is eternity, bliss, and knowledge. Similarly, Lord Brahma prays in Brahma Samhita, first sloka, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha, Anadiradir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. That Supreme Lord has got a form of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. So, Kardamuni saw the form of the Lord, and being pleased by that, Kardamuni Shashi, the Lord revealed the form, and these forms are all described in the Vedas or Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam or related scriptures. One cannot speculate on the form of the Lord. As it is mentioned, the purport also, that the Lord is not impersonal, and one cannot speculate on the form of the Lord, but one has to understand the form of the Lord to those that are mentioned in the scriptures. Text number 9. Translation. Kardamuni saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is free from material contamination in his eternal form. Effulgent like the sun, wearing a garland of white lotuses and water lilies. The Lord was clad in spotless yellow silk, and his lotus face was fringed with slick dark locks of curly hair. So here there is no purport, but again it is mentioned here that the Lord's form is free from all material contamination. Our body is subject to material contamination, material conditioning, etc. But the Lord's body is transcendental in nature. It is above the three modes of material nature. Therefore, it is not subject to material contamination or conditioning. Text number 10. Some of these slokas describe the beauty of the Lord. Translation. Adorned with a crown and earrings, he held his characteristic conch, disc, and mace in three of his hands, and a white lily in the fourth. He glanced about in a happy, smiling mood, whose sight captivates the heart of all devotees. So here there's a mention about how the Lord holds Shankha Chakra Gada, and instead of lotus, it is mentioned the Lord held a white lily in his hand. The Lord also glanced at Kardamuni and smiled at him, which attracts the devotee of the Lord. Imagine tomorrow the Lord is pleased with us and the Lord smiles at us, how we will be attracted. So Kardamuni also was attracted by seeing the form of the Lord, and the Lord not only glanced at him, but also smiled at him. Now, if you look at smile, there are some important points on the smile. Krishna was smiling in the battle, in the midst of the Kurukshetra battle. Now, Krishna was smiling at Arjuna, though Arjuna was grief-stricken. But the point in that particular smile was that normally in the material world, we see when somebody smiles, when he smiles when somebody else is in distress. But in a situation like this, in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Krishna was smiling at Arjuna because he knew that Arjuna was going to come to a solution by accepting the proposal that will be given by Krishna. And that was a recitation of Bhagavad Gita, after which Arjuna surrendered. So this is another example is like when a sick patient goes to a doctor, the doctor always gives a pleasing smile by which the patient automatically becomes half cured. So this is one way that Krishna actually smiled at Arjuna. So the smile in the material world is normally different from what is normally takes place between devotees of the Lord or by even Krishna, because many times people might smile, but then the motive might be different. So the Lord glanced also, and he also smiled at Kardamuni. Text number 11. A golden streak on his chest, the famous Kaustuba gem, suspended from his neck, he stood in the air with his lotus feet placed on the shoulders of Garuda. So here, apart from the description of the beauty of the Lord, there is a mention of what is perfection of yoga. Perfection of yoga is seeing the Lord on a person-to-person basis. And this Krishna conscious movement is specifically meant for one to see Krishna directly at that moment of our leaving the body. And also there's a mention of how the abode of the Lord is made of Chintamani stone. And the Lord is served by millions and thousands of gopis. Similarly, there's a quote by Brahma in Brahma Samhita where he prays, Chintamani prakarasatma sukalpa vriksha laksha videshu surabhira vipalayantam lakshmi sahasra sada sampara sevyamanam govinda mahadi purusham tamham bhajami. So the Lord's abode is filled with millions of purpose trees, surrounded by purpose trees and spiritual gems like Chintamani, and is always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds and thousands of Lakshmis and Gopis. So another important point is that Garuda was very, very fortunate to have the Lord's lotus feet placed on his head. It is not very easy to place Lord's lotus feet placed on one's head. One example is about Kalia. Though Kalia was a demon by his behavior, but still by the prayers of his wives, the Lord danced on his foot and by placing his lotus feet on his head. So they were all very fortunate souls to have the Lord on their head. There's also a mention about how the Lord was wearing a Kaustuba gem. And the decorations in the body of the Lord are not imaginary. They are real, and it is beyond our material condition to imagine how beautiful these decorations might be attractive. Text number 12. This has got a slightly long purport, so we'll go through this in detail. I'll read the verse also. Jadaharsho patan murta shitau labda manoratah ghibistva abhyagrina priti sabhavatma kritanjalihi. Translation. When Kardamuni actually realized the Supreme Personality of Godhead in person, he was greatly satisfied because his transcendental desire was fulfilled. He fell on the ground with his head bowed to offer obeisances unto the lotus feet of the Lord. His heart, naturally full of love of God, with folded hands, he satisfied the Lord with prayers. We'll go through some important points in this sloka. Yeah. So Kardamuni was satisfied because he realized that his transcendental desire was fulfilled by seeing the Lord. Now, Kardamuni, as we will see as we go through the slokas, Kardamuni also had a desire, but it is considered to be a transcendental desire because Kardamuni was a very saintly person. So his desires cannot be material. So it is mentioned that his desire was transcendental. And as soon as his desire to see the Lord was fulfilled, he realized that the purpose of the yoga that he performed was fruitful. When he was pleased, then Kardamuni offered his obeisances unto the lotus feet of the Lord. And being satisfied in love, he offered his prayers to the Lord. So it is mentioned here as to how in Samadhi stage, normally in the yoga system also, the last stage is called Samadhi. In that Samadhi stage, one can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his partial form as Paramatma or as he is. So Samadhi is described as authoritative in the yoga scriptures, such as Patanjali Sutras also, to be a transcendental pleasure. So Patanjali Yoga also mentions about this Samadhi stage as one to realize the partial form of the Lord as Paramatma or as he is. That means the Dhyana Yoga system also basically is meant to meditate on the four-handed form of the Lord as the super soul in the heart. So it is authentic. And there's a further mention that the yoga system described in the books of Patanjali is authoritative, but the modern so-called yogis who have manufactured their own ways, not considering the authorities, are simply ludicrous. That's why it is said that one must also always follow bona fide authorities. And the real Ashtanga Yoga, it is that which is described in the Patanjali Yoga system, not otherwise. Then there is a mention about sometimes impersonalists pollute this Patanjali Yoga system also, saying that because they are all monists, Patanjali actually describes that the soul is transcendently pleased when he meets the super soul and sees him. That means we know that there is a soul within our heart, and this soul, when he sees the super soul, he becomes very, very pleased in the heart, because it's just like a child meeting his father, the child becomes very pleased. Similarly, the soul, when he meets the super soul, he becomes very pleased. There is also a mention that if the existence of the super soul and the individual soul is admitted, then the impersonalist theory of monism is nullified. That means the actual meaning is that the monists normally think that the soul and super soul are the same, but actually they are not the same. the soul is a part of the super soul. So they can qualitatively, it may be the same, but quantitatively there is a big difference between the soul and the super soul. So according to Patanjali system, when one becomes free from all material desires, he attains his real transcendental situation, and realization of that stage is called spiritual power. So whether we take the yogas of Patanjali system or even the Bhakti Yoga, the ultimate this thing is that one has to become free from material desires. And when one becomes free, he attains a real transcendental situation, which is what described in Bhagavad Gita as Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma Nasochati Nakangshati. And that stage is called spiritual power. In material activities, a person engages in the modes of material nature, and the aspirations of such people are religiosity, economic development, 35 senses, and then to become one with the Supreme. So there might be many people who might call themselves to be religious, but ultimately what they follow is dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Their understanding of moksha is becoming one with the Supreme Lord by merging with the Supreme Lord. One can never be merging with the Supreme Lord. That is a wrong conception. Under any cost, the individuality of the soul is not lost. So according to the Monis, when a yogi becomes one with the Supreme and loses his individual existence, he attains a highest stage called Kaivalya. This is what the impersonalists normally say, they attain Kaivalya, that is merging into the absolute. But actually the stage of realization of personality of Godhead is different. The oneness of understanding that the Supreme Lord is fully spiritual, and in full spiritual realization, one can understand what he is, that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is called Kaivalya. Or in the language of Patanjali also, that the soul is a part of the super soul. They are one in quality, but not in quantity. And then when one becomes freed from material desires and becomes fixed in spiritual realization of the self and the super self, that is what is called Chit Shakti. That means when one realizes that he has become free from material desires, he fixes himself in the spiritual realization, focusing on both the self as well as the super self. That is what is called Chit Shakti. In full spiritual realization, there is a perception of spiritual happiness, which is what described in Bhagavad Gita as Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma Nasochati Nakangshati. Also, this samadhi or trance is described as two different kinds. One is called Samprajnata and the other is called Asamprajnata, or mental speculation and self-realization. In samadhi, one can realize by his spiritual senses the spiritual form of the Lord. That means only in a samadhi stage, which takes place by devotional service, one can understand that by spiritual senses, one can be freed from all contamination and at the same time see the spiritual form of the Lord also. The other process is called mental speculation, by which one will never be able to see the form of the Lord. Another important point in this particular sloka is devotional service begins with the relationship of the individual soul and the Supreme Soul, or Krishna's devotees. And when one attains it, there is no question of falling down. So devotional service or bhakti means utilizing all our senses in the service of the Supreme Lord Rishikesha, who is the master of the senses, by engaging one's senses to please the Lord. And when one does that, it is said that one does not fall down. But if through the yoga system, one wants to attain the stage of seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face, but is attracted instead to attainment of some material power, then he is deterred from proceeding further. The point is that if one practices yoga, whether dhyana yoga or bhakti yoga, whatever it may be, but at the same time has got material desires, though he might be wanting to see the Lord face to face, but if he is attracted by attainment to some material power, because what happens is one practices any of these yogic process, the Lord empowers a devotee with some power, maybe material, maybe spiritual. But then when one is attracted by this material power, that is an impediment for one to proceed further in the process of yoga. So one should not get attracted by these powers, material powers. So material enjoyment as encouraged by bogus yogis has nothing to do with transcendental realization of spiritual happiness. So one is material enjoyment, which one might think as material happiness, but as per Shastras, there is no such a thing called material happiness. That can be distress, but there can never be material happiness. But it is different from the spiritual happiness, which is transcendental happiness. So real devotees of Bhakti Yoga accept only the material necessities of life absolutely needed to maintain the body and soul together. They refrain completely from all exaggerated material sense gratification. So the real devotees of Bhakti Yoga, those who practice real true Bhakti devotional service, they refrain from any type of sense gratification, and they utilize their senses or whatever is available within only to keep the body and soul together. And they refrain from all types of material sense gratification, for which they are prepared to undergo all kinds of tribulation, provided they can make progress in the realization of personality of Godhead. That means devotees of the Lord accept even Bhakti Yoga not with an intention to get some material power, but to free from to keep the body and soul together. Very minimal that is required to sustain the body and soul, to practice Bhakti Yoga, by which they can realize that they are making progress on the path of self-realization. Now text number 13. So from text number 13 onwards, here we will see Kardamoni becomes pleased with the Lord, and for the next few slokas, he glorifies the Lord and offers some wonderful prayers. Text number 13. The great sage Kardama said, "O supreme worshipful Lord, my power of sight is now fulfilled, having attained the greatest perfection of the sight of you, who are the reservoir of all existence. Through many successive births of deep meditation, advanced yogis aspire to see your transcendental form." This is also a very important look up with a lot of important points. Now, Kardamuni says, my power of sight is now fulfilled. That means Kardamuni says that whatever he is able to see, his power of sight is fulfilled by seeing the Lord on a personal basis. Why? Because having attained the greatest perfection of the sight of you, that means the greatest perfection of that one can get in his lifetime is seeing the Lord on a person-to-person basis. And who is the Lord? The Lord is the reservoir of all the existences. Everything exists on the Lord only. Everything goes back to the Lord after annihilation. Everything comes back from the Lord only. And everything exists on the Lord. So when one sees that type of a Lord, one feels satisfied. And the next point is, when therefore one's mind, body, and activities are situated in the service of the Lord, one is on the highest perfectional state of goodness. So by utilizing our mind, body, and activities, we normally say manasa, vacha, karmana, in the service of the Lord, one is situated on the highest perfectional stage of goodness. So the example is given in the purport itself, that the sense of sight, when engaged in seeing the beauty of the Lord, is perfected. So when we see the beauty of the Lord with our eyes, our eyesight is perfected. The power to hear, when engaged in hearing the glories of the Lord, is perfected. So when we hear the glories of the Lord, our sense of hearing is perfected. The power to taste, when one enjoys the Krishna by eating Krishna Prasada. Then when all the senses engage in relationship with the personality of Godhead, one's perfection is technically called Bhakti Yoga, which entails detaching the senses from material indulgence and attaching them to the service of the Lord. I'll repeat this line again, it's very important. Here it says, when all the senses are engaged in the service of the personality of Godhead, one's perfection is called technically Bhakti Yoga. So Bhakti Yoga means engaging all the services in the service of the Lord, by which one becomes detached of the sense gratification of material indulgence. One may have some material senses devoted towards material indulgence, but one becomes free when all the senses are engaged in the service of the Lord. Then there is a mention, when one is freed from all the designated conditioned life and fully engages in the service of the Lord, one's service is called Bhakti Yoga. So one should become, by practicing Bhakti Yoga, one should become free from all the designations, material designations that we may develop over many lifetimes. And we are always engaging service of the Lord. Another example is given in Srimad Bhagavatam about Maharaja Ambrisha. He used all his senses, his hands in cleaning the Lord's temple. Normally, even devotees of the Lord are reluctant to use their hands in cleaning the temple because they consider this as a very menial service. But Shastras say, the more you clean the temple, the more you clean your heart. Other examples like are mentioned. Of course, I'm not going into all the senses. His sense of smell in smelling the fragrance of tulsi offered to the Lord. He also engaged in utilizing his legs in walking to the holy places and temples of the Lord. These days, normally people are reluctant to walk also to the temples of the Lord, even if they are nearby. They would like to use the easier means of convenience. But Maharaj Ambrisha was one example where he utilized everything, all his senses, the service of the Lord. And then there is one more example, one more important point. Kadamuni admits that seeing the Lord personally in Bhakti Yoga is the perfection of sight. The exalted perfection of seeing the Lord is not exaggerated by Kardamuni. He gives evidence that those who are actually elevated in yoga aspire in life after life to see this personality of Godhead. That means life after life, yogis aspire to see the form of the Lord. That means it is not very easy to see the Lord in one lifetime. So those who practice yoga also, it may happen in many, many lifetimes, but the ultimate goal is to see the form of personality of Godhead. Text number 14. Transition. Kadamuni says, your lotus feet are the true vessel to take one across the ocean of mundane nescience. Only persons deprived of their intelligence by the spell of the deluding energy will worship those feet with a view to attain trivial and momentary pleasures of the senses, which even persons rotting in hell can attain. However, O my Lord, you are so kind that you bestow mercy even upon them. This is again a very important sloka. I'm skipping the sloka recitation because the time is very limited. We have a lot to go. So here Kadamuni is glorifying the Lord's lotus feet by mentioning that it's a true vessel for to take one to cross over the ocean of mundane nescience. That means this material world is nothing but an ocean of mundane nescience. But one who takes shelter of the Lord's lotus feet, they can easily cross over this ocean of materialistic thing. There is a similar quote in Srimad Bhagavatam 11th Canto, where in the song of the Avanti Brahmana, the Brahmana says, I shall cross over the insurmountable ocean of nescience by being firmly fixed in the service of the lotus feet of Krishna. So by fully thinking of the lotus feet of Krishna, one can cross over this insurmountable ocean of nescience. That means this ocean is insurmountable. And this is what the Avanti Brahmana says. But by taking shelter of the Lord's lotus feet, he can cross over. Further says this was approved by previous acharyas who are firm in fixed devotion to the Lord Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So only persons deprived of their, the next important point is, only those who are deprived of their intelligence, those who have no intelligence, by the spell of their deluding energy, will worship those feet with a view to attain trivial and momentary pleasures of the senses, which can be obtained even rotting in hell. That means it's a very important point. Those who worship the lotus feet to get some momentary pleasure of their senses, material sense pleasure, they have buddhas, or they are called less intelligent. They have no intelligence at all. Because they are trying to get something. I will give some examples. Here, Kadamuni says, however you are, O my Lord, you are so kind that you bestow your mercy even upon them. So that means here Kadamuni is glorifying the Lord. Devotees of the Lord automatically cross over by taking shelter of the Lord's lotus feet. But there are many who worship the Lord lotus feet with a motive of attaining some momentary material pleasure, which can be attained even in hell without asking for it. But Kadamuni glorifies the Lord, saying that you are so great that you are even bestowing your mercy upon such souls also. This is the mercy of the Lord. So there are two kinds of devotees, those who desire material pleasures and those who desire nothing but service to the Lord. Material pleasures can be attained even by dogs and hogs, whose condition of life is hellish. The hog also eats, sleeps, and enjoys sex life to the full extent, and it is also very satisfied with such hellish enjoyment of material existence. So those who are engaged in activities of eating, mating, and sleeping, they think that they are having enjoyment, but these can be attained even in hellish conditions of life, like cats and dogs. Modern yogis advise that because one has senses, one must enjoy to the fullest extent like cats and dogs. So there are many so-called pseudo-yogis. They propagate this theory that as long as one is here, he must try to enjoy his life as much as possible, which is condemned in this particular sloka by Kardamuni. He says that such material pleasures are available even in hellish condition. But the Lord is so kind that even if such so-called yogis are satisfied with hellish pleasures, the Lord can give them facilities to attain that material pleasure they desire, but they cannot attain this perfectional stage like Kardamuni. The Lord may give them that benefit which they desire, but the Lord will never give the perfectional stage attained by Kardamuni. Another important point is hellish or demoniac persons do not actually know what is the ultimate attainment in perfection, and therefore they think that sense gratification is the highest goal of life. They advise that one can satisfy the senses and at the same time, by reciting some mantras and by some practice, one can aspire for some cheap perfection. So these are all some cheap perfect who propagate for cheap perfection, and they are called as Hatame Dasa, which means those whose brains are spoiled. So those who aspire for material happiness, their brains are spoiled. Need to skip some of them due to shortage of time. The Lord also confirms in Bhagavad Gita, the translation, whatever a person aspires to receive from me, I offer him as he desires. That means whatever a person aspires from the Lord gives tries to fulfill those desires also. Text number 15. Translation. Therefore, desiring to marry a girl of like disposition, who may prove to be a veritable cow of plenty in my married life, to satisfy my lustful desire, I too have sought the shelter of your lotus feet, which are the source of everything, as you are like a desire tree. This is also a very important sloka. We'll go through some of the important points here. Here, Kardamuni is taking shelter of the Lord's lotus feet with the desire to have a wife like a cow. It is said that the cow is like a desire tree. Cow can fulfill all the desires. So the Lord's lotus feet also fulfills all of one's material desires. Now, that is why the Lord's lotus feet is compared to a desire tree. Now, Kardamani's desire, his desire was to have a wife who can help him fulfill his desires. Now, sometimes one who does not understand this, the intricacies of this, might think that how come Kardamuni had a material desire, whereas in the previous slokas, he is telling that those who aspire material desires and serve the Lord, their brain is lost or their intelligence is lost. But here Kardamuni himself is asking something from the Lord. we must understand the purpose of this. Now, Kardamuni's desire is not material because he was ordered by Lord Brahma to create progeny. But still he is humbling himself to the Lord, and the Lord became impressed with that. And tears came flowing from the Lord's eyes. That means Kadambani was actually asked by Lord Brahma to create progeny. But for that progeny, he needs somebody, a wife. So Kadambani is asking that this is a material desire I'm asking, but the Lord knows that it's not a material desire because he is doing on the instruction of Lord Brahma, who is also a devotee of the Lord. So seeing how, the humble nature of Kardamuni, the tears started flowing out from the Lord's eyes. And Kardamuni further says, although I know that nothing material should be asked from you, I nevertheless desire to marry a girl of like disposition. This like disposition is very, very important in this verse because in the earlier days, the boys and girls were married, were united to make themselves happy. And Srila Prabhupada mentioned in the Prabhupada that not more than 25 years ago, the parents used to consult the horoscope of an astrologer and try to match the horoscope of the boy and girl to see whether there could be a proper union in their psychological conditions, not material beauty, but psychological conditions. And these considerations are very, very important. That is why it is said that marriage of the years were very successful because there was nothing called a divorce. In fact, divorce was not known at all during those years. It started in the last couple of years, started originating from the West. And then we are all very nice, smart enough to follow the Western countries. So now we are also following. Nowadays, the marriage is based more on physical beauty, and therefore marriage does not last and ends up in divorce. Kardamuni also says that his desire is to fulfill the instructions of the Lord Brahma to create progeny. So Kardamuni also wants to fulfill the instructions of Lord Brahma to create progeny. So he is humbling himself. And he says that Brahma is also a great devotee of the Lord. And Kardamuni, another very important point in this sloka is, Kardamuni did not go to any demigods like Uma or anybody else asking for a wife. It is said in the Shastra that one who requires a good wife prays to Uma. But this is a normal practice we see in the society. But in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that those who approach the demigods for a particular desire, actually those desires are also fulfilled by the Supreme Lord himself. But however, anything that a devotee desires, whether he is free from desires or he has got some desire, he should approach the Supreme Lord. For which there is a nice quote in Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto. It's a very famous verse, Akamo Sarva Kamava. I'll just read the translation. It says the person who has broader intelligence, whether he be full of material desires or without any material desire, or desiring liberation, must by all means worship the Supreme Whole, the personality of Godhead. That means one who is really intelligent, if he has got a material desire, or he wants liberation, or he has no desire, he must worship only the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Another important point is that Kardamuni is also announcing his plans to renounce after the marriage. So it cannot be a material desire in the case of Kardamuni, because he is already announcing that after marriage he will leave his progeny behind and take a renounced order of life. So he is very clear as to what his plans are going to be. So it cannot be considered a material desire. Text number 16. He further says, "O my Lord, you are the master and leader of all living entities. Under your direction, all conditioned souls, as if bound by rope, are constantly engaged in satisfying their desires. Following them, O embodiment of religion, I also bear oblations for you who are eternal time." This is also another important sloka where Kardamuni says, now there is a quote in the Popper where it is mentioned that this material life is given to the conditioned souls with an opportunity to enjoy their desires for sense gratification also. But at the same time, by giving an opportunity to enjoy sense gratification, the Lord gives an opportunity to purify those desires and ultimately become free from conditional existence. The important point is that no living entity is independent of the mercy of the Lord. All are dependent on the Lord, for which there is a sloka that Nityanam Chaitanya Chaitanya. And it is the Lord who is supplying all the necessities of all the living entities. So one should utilize these necessities of life in the service of the Lord and utilize them for their spiritual progress, not for their sense gratification. And only that which is required for their sustenance, keep the body and soul, has to be used and not otherwise. One should not exploit or exploit more and more resources than what the Lord has provided. For which a quotation from Ishopanishad is given, that everything is universe. The sloka Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam, and I'm not reading the sloka with a lot of time. Everything animate or inanimate is controlled and owned by the Lord. Therefore, one should accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. This is also a reference to the previous few slokas, during which I mentioned that one should keep his body and soul together, not beyond that. One should not exploit more beyond that. Also, there is a point that the answer that everyone is competent to be liberated from material bondage, but it is everyone's duty that try to enjoy to the present, according to the present position, under the direction of the Lord as prescribed in the Vedas. Now, the Vedas are direct methods of the Lord, which words of the Lord, which explain what is sense gratification, how much can one utilize his senses for sense gratification. That is all one should go for. One should not go beyond that. Whereas we see today, people generally try to exploit material nature as much as possible to gratify their senses. Also, Kartam Muni mentions one more point. He addresses the Lord as Shukla, means he is the leader of the religion, and one who is pious should follow the rules of the religion, for such rules are prescribed by the Lord himself. The religious principles are emanated by the Lord himself, Dharmam tu Sakshat Bhagavad Pranitam, and no one can manufacture or concoct a religion of their own. Therefore, one should follow the Vedic regulations and surrender unto the Supreme Lord. That is the ultimate goal of perfection of life. So even if one gets an opportunity to gratify the senses, one should try to limit their gratification, by which one becomes purified. Also, there is a mention that one should live a life of piety, following the religious rules and regulations, marry and live peacefully for elevation to the higher status of spiritual realization. So one should follow a life of piety. One should not lead an impious life. One should follow religious rules and regulations established by the Lord. One should also marry. Of course, these days there may not be many possibilities of one taking renounced order right from the beginning. So marriage is also permitted, and one should live peacefully for elevation to higher status of spiritual realization. Text number 17. He further says, however, persons who have given up stereotyped worldly affairs and the beastly followers of these affairs, and who have taken shelter of the umbrella of your lotus feet, by drinking the intoxicating nectar of your qualities and activities in discussions with one another, can be freed from the primary necessities of the material body. Very important sloka. So those who have given up their worldly affairs and who have taken shelter of the umbrella of the lotus feet of the Lord, just by drinking the nectar of the Lord's qualities and activities, and by discussing with one another the Lord's activities, one can become freed from primary necessities of the material body. We all have a lot of material hankering, but by discussing Krishna Katha amongst one another, one becomes free from a lot of material hankering. So similar quote in Bhagavad Gita, Machitta Matkata Prana Bodhayanti Parasparam. The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service. and they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. This is how devotees always engage in glorifying the Lord. Another important point that is mentioned in this sloka is about that this material world is like a forest, which we sing in the normally in the Mangalati, samsara davana nanali the loka. So this material world is like a forest fire, where the fire erupts at any point of time. And it is the water that comes in the form of spiritual master's mercy that can extinguish this forest fire. And only by drinking the nectar of chanting and hearing the Lord's pastimes can one forget the intoxication of material existence. That means this material existence is a sort of an intoxication which binds one in this material world. But by drinking the nectar of chanting and hearing the pastimes of the Lord, one can forget this material intoxication. I might need to move a little faster. Text number 18. Your wheel, which has 3 naves, rotates around the axis of the imperishable Brahman. It has 13 spokes, 360 joints, 6 rims, and numberless leaves carved upon it. Though its revolution cut short the lifespan of the entire creation, this wheel of tremendous velocity cannot touch the lifespan of the devotees of the Lord. Basically, this is a mention about time. Time controls everything in this material world. And it starts from Mahavishnu's glancing over the material nature. And then the calculation of time is taken in different categories, which it has been covered before. And time takes one from past to the present to the future. Time also controls everyone and everything in this material world, but time does not affect the lifespan of a devotee, which means that the life material point of view, even a devotee has got his lifespan, but time does not affect, means time does not control a devotee like the way it controls, entangles a non-devotee in this material world. Text number 19. My dear Lord, you alone create the universe, O personality of Godhead. Desiring to create these universes, you create them, maintain them, and again wind them up by your own energies, which are under the control of your second energy called Yogamaya. Just as a spider creates a cobweb by its own energy and again winds it up. So here there is a mention about energy and energetic. Without energetic, there cannot be energy. So without the Lord, similarly, there cannot be any creation. So the Lord creates of his own, at his own will. He maintains it at his own will, and then he annihilates on his own. But impersonalists say that the Lord becomes diminished by his creation, but the Lord is not affected by materials, actions, and reactions. The Lord remains the same because he is transcendental to the material world. He is not affected by the creations he makes. Example is given about the creation annihilation, like a spider which makes a cobweb and later enters into it, and then the cobweb enters into it. Similarly, the Lord creates, and finally, after annihilation, they all enter into the Lord. Text number 20. Translation. My dear Lord, although it is not your desire, you manifest this creation of gross and subtle element just for our sensual satisfaction. Let your costless mercy be upon us, for you have appeared before us in your external form, adorned with a splendid wreath of tulsi leaves. So many times, the material world creation is not a will of the Lord. The Lord does not create this material world out of his own will. Rather, the Lord creates this material world out of his costless mercy to give us an opportunity to the conditioned souls like us to fulfill our desires, which we have to separately enjoy from the Lord. But the Lord also says in the scriptures that, which is also mentioned Srimad Bhagavatam, Padam Padam, that this material world is full of dangers. And but for one who has taken shelter of the Lord's lotus feet, that material world looks like the amount of water in the footprint of a calf, which is about 2 inches or 3 inches. So ultimately, the point is to become free from these material miseries, one has to take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. Text number 21. I continuously offer my respectful obeisances unto your lotus feet of which it is worthy to take shelter, because you shower all benedictions on the insignificant, to give all living entities detachment from fruitive activities. By realizing you have expanded these material worlds by your own energy. So again, here there's an important point as to how Katamuri is now offering obeisances to the Lord, which is worthy of taking shelter, because the Lord can shower whatever benediction one wants, even to the insignificant ones. And the Lord has created this material world to give detachment from fruitive activities by realizing the Supreme Lord. That's how the Lord has created. So whether one is engaged, one desires material enjoyment or liberation, or even one wants to engage in transcendent loving service of the Lord, one should worship the Lord, offering obeisances unto the Lord, because by offering obeisances, Lord becomes pleased, and the Lord can award anyone his desired benediction. And the Lord also says, Ye yatamam prapadyante, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. So whatever desire Lord, living being has got, the Lord fulfills those desires, whether it's liberation or material or transcendental. I'll skip some of these because some more important slokas are there. Text 22. Maitreya Risham, sincerely extolled in these words, Lord Vishnu, shining very beautifully on the shoulders of Garuda, replied with words as sweet as nectar. His eyebrows moved gracefully as he looked at the sage with a smile full of affection. So the Lord became very pleased at Kardamuni, and he looked at Kardamuni with a smile, and he replied to him with words which are as sweet as nectar. Words are called Amrita. Just as the Lord is transcendental in nature, the words emanating from the Lord are also Amrita. Amrita means one who does not meet with death. The words and activities of the Lord are deathless. Therefore, they are not manufactured in this material world. So the Lord's emanation, sound emanation from the Lord's mouth, they are not manufactured in this material world. There's a big difference between the sound from the material and spiritual world. We'll not go into these details today for want of time. Text 23. The Supreme Lord said, having come to know what was in your mind, I have already arranged for that for which you have worshipped me well through your mental and sensory discipline. It's a very important sloka again. Here the Lord says, you have worshipped me with mental and sensory discipline. That means Kardamuni performed austerities, he performed tapasya, and he had a desire, but still he had a mental and discipline of his senses also, by which he worshipped the Lord, and the Lord became pleased. And when the Lord was pleased, the Lord here says that Lord realized, Lord knows, Lord is situated in everyone's heart as Paramatma. He realized what was the desire of Kardamuni. He says that I have already fulfilled, I have already arranged for that for which you worship me. So the Lord already arranged what Kardamuni's desire was there, which will be described in the next sloka. So when a devotee worships Krishna, he does not get entangled. But if a devotee worships a demigod, asking for a material desire, he becomes entangled. Also, because the Lord purifies the desire of a devotee, the Lord is interested in the welfare of a devotee. The Lord is always interested in the welfare of a devotee. So the Lord knows how to purify the desire of a devotee also. Text number 24. The Lord continued, my dear Rishi, O leader of the living entities, for those who serve me in devotion by worshipping me, especially persons like you, who have given up everything unto me, there is never any question of frustration. That means the point is that the Lord says there are two types of devotees, Sakama devotees and Akama devotees. Akama devotees are those who don't have any desire. Sakama devotees are those who have desire. Whatever devotees have, the Lord fulfills, but the Lord becomes more pleased when one devotee does not have a desire. But even if he has got a desire, the Lord fulfills the desire. Text 25. The emperor, Lord tells Kardamuni now, the emperor Swayambhu Manu, the son of Lord Brahma, who is well known for his righteous acts, has his seat in Brahma Varta and rules over the earth with its 7 oceans. I won't spend much of a time on this sloka because the next 2 slokas are very important. Text 26. Day after tomorrow, O Brahmana, that celebrated emperor who is expert in religious activities will come here with his queen Shatarupa wishing to see you. So the Lord is telling Kardamuni that day after tomorrow, Lord is even telling the time when they will come and see you. He says Swayambhu Manu will come with his wife Shatarupa. Why? This is mentioned in the next sloka. He has text 27. He has a grown-up daughter whose eyes are black. She is ready for marriage and she has good character and all good qualities. She is also searching for a good husband. My dear sir, her parents will come to see you who are exactly suitable for her, just to deliver their daughter to you as your wife. So here the Lord is telling Kardamuni, my dear sir, these parents, that is Swayambhu and the Shatarupa, they will come and make a proposal to Kardamuni, offering their daughter Devavati as his wife. I mentioned about how selections have been going on in the previous words. Now, here, it is mentioned that girls are never to be thrown in the public street to search for a husband. Girls are grown, and then at the right time, it is the duty of the parents to select a suitable bride for them. This is how the Vedic system was. Text number 28, which is last, which is important also, where the Lord says that Princess Holy says will be just the type you have been thinking of in your heart for all these long years. She will soon be yours and will serve you to your heart's content. This is very important because there are some 2-3 important points. I'll take 2-3 minutes more. Only by God's grace, it is said that can one get a nice wife just as he desires. Similarly, it is only by God's grace that the girl gets a husband suitable to her heart. It is said that if we pray to the Supreme Lord, every transaction of our material existence, everything will be done very nicely and just suitable to our heart's desires. In other words, in all circumstances, we must take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and depend completely on him. Also, there is a mention that Kardamuni was a Brahmana, whereas Swayambhu Manu was a Kshatriya. Therefore, intercaste marriage was permitted even during those ages under some stipulations, like a Brahmana can marry a Kshatriya's woman, but not vice versa. So there are different types of marriages. I'll not dwell into that detail. Point is, if we depend on the choice of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we will receive benedictions in greater opulence than we desire. We may desire something, but if we leave it to the Lord and take shelter of him, we will get benedictions more than we desire. So, and also that, yes, yeah. With this, I conclude the class for the day. I mean, until the time I'm given permission, I can take some questions. There was some more points, but I couldn't cover these for short of time. Yes, anybody, any questions?
Hare Krishna, thank you, Prabhuji,
Very
Dhanyavad.
well covered, Prabhuji. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranam, Prabhuji.
Dhanyavad, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Prabhu.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you.
Hare Krishna. Prabhu, this is Swayambhu Manu, Prabhu.
Yes, Swayambhu Manu. Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. Fine, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, anybody else? If there are no questions or any comments, can I take the class as closed?